I mean, I think it's just worth noting, having seen this 15-minute concise presentation of the plan for London, how few plans of London he showed. I mean, it was a series of very simple ideas. Stop it growing outside the edge, invest in central areas where there's land, and then work on certain very, very drilling specific areas and drilling down with the sort of detail of project that you've shown. And I think that's an interesting thing for us to just keep in our minds as we think through different planning processes. It's sort of very much an approach to design which is quite novel, I think, also for London, and it's probably fair to say one is finding one's way. I mentioned before that Andy Altman, I mean, he started off as being an international guest as part of the urban age, and I think perhaps one of the problems of being successful as an enterprise is that it has a vortex effect, and he's now come to London. So he also, instead of talking about many of the other projects that he could have talked about, is going to focus very much on London, but also focus a bit on Washington, D.C. with the experience he had there. So could you welcome Andy Altman? Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. And yeah, I try to be the personal embodiment of the urban age by having a new job at every conference just to keep the pace. And I think I've been I'm about 80% thus far, so not bad to show the momentum of the global economy. Okay, so I'm going to jump in and talk about a couple things. I'm going to focus on the Olympics, but just to give it a brief context, with two propositions. The first proposition is that there are, I think, moments in the life of cities when there are a confluence of variables that come together to produce truly transformational change, when vision, political will, and capital come together and create new pieces of a city that leave their mark for generations and often determine the future of those cities. And it forces us to ask questions about the city that have been raised in the past day, questions that Richard Sennett raised about, does it lead to homogenization of the city? Does it connect with the DNA of the city, or does it ignore it, as Ricky Burdett has said? Does it connect the physical and the social aspects of the city? Does it lead to convergence or divergence, as Saskia talked about yesterday? Does it incorporate the narratives of the city, as Suketu talked about, or does it turn its back on those narratives and look to a future narrative, but not the present narratives of those who actually live in parts of cities that we're hoping to improve? Those are the questions, the underlying premises, as we look at grand visions, the sort of topic of this, and begin to question what underlies them. And as we've toured in the urban age, we've seen manifestations of this, whether it was Santa Fe district in Mexico City, Pudong in Shanghai, what may happen in Dharavi in Mumbai, Sandtown in Johannesburg, new pieces of city that in many ways, as those cities were looking to be global, became isolated and separated. And of course, Canary Wharf, one can argue, in London as well, has seen as a model of exactly that tension. So I'm going to talk about that in the context of the Olympics, which is London is exactly at that moment when there's the political will, the vision, and the capital to take a piece of city and transform it. I've been very fortunate, I have to say, coming into this position. Let's see, what is this? Let's go up or down. Oh, this one? Oh, sorry, I thought it was this. To actually inherit the policies that Richard Rogers spoke of. So this occurred very important, connecting to the last panel, the policy context, the political context within a major project like this operates are essential to determining what it will look like and be like in the future and what direction it's going. And the project of the Olympics sits in the context, as Peter Bishop was speaking of a plan for London, very simple, that looked at the connection of keeping investment around transit, about containing growth within the green belt, and looking east to London's future. This is looking out toward the Olympic site to where future growth in London will be. The growth of London is projected to keep growing, another 1 million people over the next 15 or so years. So the question of how to accommodate growth within these growth boundaries and how to look for those opportunities to take brownfield sites, regenerate them, accommodate population, and also new economic activity very much as a focus. This is what Peter showed in terms of the direction of the city moving east toward the Olympic area. Very much London has grown based on transit, based on the notion of, in a way, being unplanned and villages, so connecting all of these different pieces through a transit system, and the greatest potential for all this to come together in East London. Long talked about, and this is the context, sort of vision for a long time of the Thames Gateway, a vast area of where the growth of London was to go. But it was waiting for a moment. It needed something. It needed to make that big change in a built-out city. What could bring together the political will and the capital with a vision? Well, the Olympics was exactly that opportunity, seen as a moment to make a great leap for the city, use the Olympics as essentially a massive infrastructure project to fulfill this idea of the growth going east in London. So there are many people, obviously the celebration when London won, and that set in motion a process of transformation going on today. What's interesting from the beginning was the kind of aspiration that was set out, that the Olympic bid was predicated on this idea of legacy, and legacy being the idea of the transformation that could occur in terms of the city and the growth of the city going east. So using this massive project and to address an area that has some of the greatest social deprivation within London and within England as a whole. So this was very much at the moment of what this was all about. So here is, in a sense, I want to give you a work in progress. Because my first proposition was about the great moments of change. My second one that I want to report on, if you will, is that successful cities, as the Urban Age has pointed out, are about integration. And that integration is about the physical, the social, the economic, and the political that make this a piece of the city, not something apart from the city. So let's going to show you how that seems to be evolving. This is the site. It's over 600 acres of site that was acquired for the Olympics. In and of itself, an enormously bold move. If you imagine how many cities, particularly Western cities, are acquiring 600 acres through eminent domain to build the Olympics. That was pre. This is now post. This is now in progress of all the facilities being built, literally building a city from what had been a very deteriorated area, a lot of land uses, which I'll show you, but a very disconnected part of the city. Now, how do you create that connection? How do we take what is this huge site that could be a gated community, it could be a city unto itself, and make it a piece of the larger framework of London and the adjoining communities, as Peter Bishop pointed out? How do we connect that? Well, this is, in a way, the ghost that haunts all this project. On the one hand, Canary Wharf is seen as very successful, and arguably was, in securing the financial position of London as a global city. But from a physical standpoint, in many ways, looks and feels like many of the cities that we've seen in the urban age, of this stark disconnect between Canary Wharf on one hand and poorer communities on the other. And this informs very much the debate about how the Olympics will be judged as to whether it was successful or not in terms of its integration, and how this, if you will, this is sort of how do we zip this piece of the city so that it is not the void that it is today. So quickly, economic integration. I think the most important thing I can say about that is that it's built on a system of transport. It didn't wait for transport to happen later. It is part of the system, the economic system of London, part of the series of centers in London that are emerging. So it wasn't trying to create a center and hope that transport and everything will get to it, which was part of the problem with Canary Wharf, but actually it's premised on being fully integrated into the economic system of London, to Canary Wharf, to the financial center of the city, and to the other centers, and differentiated from those centers in terms of its economic function. Here it is. It's one of the strategically well-connected places in London. The Eurostar will stop there. It could be 2 hours to Paris, 2 hours to Brussels. That's not confirmed yet. That's the aspiration, but it is looked that could happen, and connects you into London. So strategically well-connected. One of, as I said, of a series of centers within East London, each one a different catalyst for growth, a different type of growth, and the Olympics giving it a whole new dimension of the connection between live, work, play that can come together as a different kind of center. But that's obviously not going to be enough. You're sitting within an area of London that has some of the highest social deprivation, highest levels of poverty and unemployment. So the program has to be not only about how it works as a center, but how it works for the people in East London. So built into the program are the skills, the connections, the outreach to the neighborhoods that are there to start preparing them for the jobs that are there, both at the Olympics and post-Olympics. So very much built into the fabric of the program are the training opportunities that will come of that. Moving quickly, the physical integration. The site clearly could be planned one way. You could take the Olympic site and have it as just islands unto itself. Or it could be integrated in the physical, bringing the grid of the city, the roads of the city, to make the connections. You can see just from the growth itself, this area of the Lee Valley where the Olympic site sits, at one time was, you can see how growth just leaps over it. And even today, as urbanization, the area in the dark, it is still sitting there as a void. And that's because it was the area of industry. You can see this is literally the swath of land. These are the disconnections of land use, of industrial. These are the actual pieces of it that have to be overcome to make physical connections surrounding the site. The picture of the aquatic center there looked at from the neighborhood. So these very much look at these disconnections. So to take a piece of city that sits as a void, and then, I see the 5-minute mark coming, and then to quickly connect these through the set of transport and linkages so that it becomes a part of the city. Here you see over 30 bridges to literally make that physical connection around the site. So the site is an island. So starting with not making it island, but making those physical connections, very important, and important symbolically as well to the neighborhoods around it as to what this site will mean for them. Social integration, that the communities around the park, as I said, some of the greatest clusters of deprivation. So you have to actually build into the Olympic site itself, how will social integration occur? It occurs through the Olympic Village itself, 3,000 units of housing. Already 50% will be affordable, both for workforce housing, intermediate, as well as social housing. So built into the very fabric of how the Olympics site will unfold will be social integration. It'll be the diversity of types, as Richard Sennett was talking about. So the different kinds of building typologies that will be a part of this will be very important in terms of the diversity of the offer and creating a distinct piece of city. And Case Christiansen's here has done a lot of the master planning and deserves a lot of credit for that, so I don't want to take credit for having thought of these things. These are many of his slides. Building new schools. And of course, looking at this, as Peter Bishop talked about, not just from the site out, but from the neighborhoods in, and building around it the clusters around these areas of social deprivation. So there's an investment program in schools, in health, that are happening concurrent with the £9 billion investment of the Olympics. So there has to be an integrated program. Finally, political integration. I mean, you have to say that one of the things that's most complex, Peter's chart showed this before, of London, of trying to get anything done, but great projects like this can lead to political alignments that are very unlikely. Will those hold after the Olympics? I think that's a question, and one that everyone's grappling with, but you're sitting within the context of 5 boroughs, a mayor that has weak powers, but has been strengthening those powers, the central government that's very involved, leads to a complexity of stakeholders, but the scale of transformation can set new political arrangements in place. Mayor Williams did that in Washington. No one thought that his vision for the Anacostia waterfront would bring the federal government to the table, resulted in a huge transformation and federal land going to the city because of a vision. So a vision and a transformative project can change even the most difficult of political alignments, the most difficult of political arrangements. And so in conclusion, what we hope is that the Olympics, which could, here is, you'll see sort of 3 pieces at what will happen at the Games, which is the site with all the venues, and literally will probably have a wall around it because it's during the Games and need to be secured, to how that evolves over time. The Olympics are now over, and we start to see the connections that are made to the community, through the bridges, through the linkages, through the social programs that will happen, through the use of the public space so that it becomes owned and felt that it's part of East London and not separate from it. And finally, what will happen as it becomes just a piece of the city integrated in. So I think that's the aspiration. I think there's a tremendous moment in London. I think the pieces are there to at least try to see that this proposition of political, economic, social, and physical integration come together. And I think it'll be a grand project over the next 20 years to try to pull that off. But having those premises in place from the beginning is, I think, fundamental and part of the questioning, because if they're not there from the beginning as the aspiration and as the principles, you will never get there, and it'll lead to isolation instead of integration of a piece of the city. Thank you.
What about Washington?
I don't have time.
He does have some slides and 2 minutes left on Washington, so you should show them.
Oh, I've been given a reprieve. Well, now that you mention it, sorry, this will be very quick. Okay, so 2 minutes to set up for Mayor Williams and my friend and inspirate and mentor in all of this. Same premise, but different city. And I think just to set this up for Washington, D.C., where I was fortunate to be planning director for Mayor Williams, Washington had a great history of planning. I'm not going to go into it, of bold planning and visions. This was the City Beautiful. This was urban renewal, which Washington pioneered. And the question for the mayor when he became mayor was a city that had bold visions of transformation, but always had the tension between, if you will, the monumental city, as seen here, of the urban renewal schemes of the 1950s and 60s, and the tension with a city of great poverty and racial and economic and social divide. How do you reconcile those two? Two literally different waterfronts. The Potomac that people know on the left, sacred space, beautiful monuments, memorials, symbol of democracy, 20 million visitors, and the other river, the Anacostia, that no one probably knows, but people are starting to know now, a place that was really a place of highest racial segregation, 98% African American, very poor, industrial part of the city. How do we reconcile these two Washingtons? You can see it here, the piece of the city, the setup. This is the Anacostia, looking toward the mall, toward the monuments, physically segregated, so as well as economically. The role of leadership was critical. We talked with Enrique Peñalosa, the mayor's vision, and I don't work for him now, so I can now say this, I'm not on his payroll, was critical because it had an aspiration to bring together what seemed impossible political alignments of a waterfront owned largely by the federal government, of people seeing grand plans before in Washington but never seeing them being for the people who lived in Washington, particularly the poorer and African American communities, and yet in a way was a huge risk. When Enrique Peñalosa talked about risk, huge risk, because this was literally off the map of the city of Washington. The mayor's goal was to put it at the center of it, to literally invert, right, to take that the center of the city would be the Anacostia waterfront here and not just the mall, put that at the center of growth and connect that growth, and these are the final two slides, Ricky, to take a piece of city that was here, 10-minute walk to the Capitol, right here, and you can see the voids, right, you see that at the top there it says public housing, barracks public housing, some of the worst condition of any public housing in the United States. You see that the physical fabric was disconnected, industrial land, and to put that back, to take public housing, such as you saw there, and again, make it a piece of the city. This is now public housing and market rate housing. You can't tell which one is which. It's socially integrated, racially integrated, economically integrated, a piece of the city, and there are lots more slides, but a whole part of the city that's been transformed, going back to the principle of the boldness of vision, the political will, mobilizing capital, and having the ideas of I think, integration of the city as being kind of the founding, if you will, constitution of the shape and form of the city were fundamental to where that's going. Thank you.
That goes down as a world first in the history of the urban age that a speaker was asked to speak for more rather than less. So I actually was taken by Tony Williams to the Anacostia waterfront only 6 months ago and was absolutely amazed by how that area, which I hadn't seen before, has been transformed into just not an exceptional piece of city, a normal piece of city, which is, I think, one of the key aspirations here. One doesn't have to use master plans and visions to make something exceptional all the time.